James Dickey is the poet from the state of Georgia whom President Carter asked to read at the inauguration ceremonies last January. Jim Dickey was well known before, largely because of his novel Deliverance and the movie that was made of it, in which he played a minor part. He was also consultant in poetry to the Library of Congress 1966 to 1968. But largely because of his inauguration appearance, he may be now the best-known poet in the United States. And the lucky fact is that Dickey deserves it. Some may not think him a particularly pleasant man. He's big, given to boasting. There's an undercurrent of violence in much of what he says. But he's also an enormously talented poet. We talked shortly after his latest book, The Zodiac, came out, and Dickey was still smarting from assertions that the book is simply a reworking of somebody else's verse.
Another poem gave me the idea for it, but it's not that. It's not reworking at all. It's an original poem that I took off from in the same sense that Shakespeare read Holinshed's Chronicles and wrote Hamlet. I don't mean any value comparison there, but it's writers adapt and readapt each other's works. There's no living in a vacuum as far as being a writer is concerned.
I think T.S. Eliot said, poor writers borrow, great writers steal.
Well, yeah, he'd be a very good example of that. He's a great writer, and he sure did rifle the whole of the library to get his own effects. But they were what emerged were the poems of T.S. Eliot, not the poems of Spencer or the poems of Shakespeare, Marlowe, Webster, Laforgue, whoever else he used.
In any case, this poem of yours, which is a book-length poem called Zodiac, is based, or the original impetus came from a Dutch poet named Marsman. Is that right?
Hendrik Marsman. Yeah.
If Mr. Marsman saw this product of yours, he wouldn't recognize it.
He would never recognize what I did with it. No.
And if you had not brought up the subject of Marsman, I doubt if there's any critic around who would have ever seen the connection.
No, they wouldn't. But the main reason I did bring it up is that I want the poem that I wrote to be a kind of an homage to Hendrik Marsman, who was killed on a refugee ship in 1940. He was torpedoed, and he's a remarkable writer, although nothing whatever like I am. There's no similarity.
Well, what was it about his original poem that intrigued you?
The structure of it seemed to be amenable to the kind of work that I then wanted to do. It gave me it was a kind of, to change the metaphor, a kind of a springboard into which I leapt into my own work.
Well, his notion was that he wanted to write the poem to end all poems, or what he might have called the great Dutch poem, or the great American novel, as we say here.
No, he did. That's all something that I put into it. No. He just wrote a poem about a man and coming back home to Amsterdam and wandering around the town without meeting anybody he knows, and looking up at the stars and listening to the town clock peel off the hours and so on, and that's about all he wrote. But it seemed to me that the idea of a homecome man who is an alcoholic, there's not anything about being an alcoholic in Marsman's original at all. But I thought that the kind of poem, the long poem that I felt myself ready to write, would be very well served by all I can say is taken off from what it seemed to me that Marsman should have done, but since he's dead, never did do it, and would not have done it even if he hadn't died. It was up to me to do it, and I felt a very strong compulsion to write the Zodiac, and so I wrote the Zodiac.
This is a man who is in desperate circumstances, who doesn't have a real niche in life, who feels that his days are coming to an end. He is an alcoholic, and you're working at least. He's penniless. He has not been a success at his career, which was that of sailor, I guess. And somehow the idea of the poet, anyway, of Jim Dickey the poet, is to tie in this series of failures with a cosmic system.
Yeah, that's essentially right. That's my poet, who is not Marsman, nor the one in Marsman's original poem at all. He's nothing like that at all. But he represents so I had him be, the last-ditch stand, the ultimate back-to-the-wall stand of the creative artist who is trying to do everything that can be done to write the ultimate poem that will explain and relate the poor, mortal, doomed human body to the starry heavens and the solar system and the universe generally. He doesn't know anything about the stars. His father had made him an amateur astronomer, but he knows a little bit about telescopes. But he's not a mathematician or a physicist or anything. He's a poet, and so the way the stars work on my protagonist is strictly through his sensibility and how he feels about them. Not really what he knows about them at all in the scientific sense, but what he feels about them and the motive force that caused the stars to be like in the patterns and the configurations that they are actually to be found in overhead. I'll read you the end.
Okay.
The poet of the Zodiac will fail. He's going to die. He hadn't probably got very long to live. But with the way he's treated himself all his life, he's a young guy, maybe 28 or 9, but he's boozed it up and dissipated so much, as so many poets do, and not only them. But he feels that if he can hold out, the poet has got to hold out and try to do this thing no matter what happens to him.